All right, welcome. We are here tonight talking about speaking with confidence. This is really once a month, I do an advocacy related workshop, and this month's focus is really thinking about how to feel confident to step up to either present workshops or do speaking or lead, kinds of mentoring types of programs. And so I feel like this is a gigantic topic, and we have carved out 1 hour, which is obviously not going to be enough to go too deep into it, but I think enough to kind of get folks inspired. So I like to know who's here with us live. So in the chat, if you could put your name would already be there because that's your screen name, but if you can put um where you're from and what kinds of talks or speaking or workshops are you thinking about wanting to do? And if you have really a vague idea, you could put that, or if you have really specific ideas, you could put it. Okay. So where you're from and what kind of talks that you want to do. And that kind of helps me gauge who's here and helps sort of make this a little bit more specific to the audience that we have today. All right. And I'm just going to be quiet for a minute while you do that. Mhm. Fantastic. So good. What's exciting is I only know about half of you, so it's kind of fun to meet some new people tonight. Um, awesome. Great. Thanks, Tessa, for letting me know. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So we have a really great range of folks, people from really all over, and people who are brand new to speaking, and others who are already doing this work and just wanting to get better at it. Um, I think that's fantastic. Uh, all right. So glad that you're here. So I had sort of my plan for tonight was to talk at you, to share some ideas that I described in the workshop description. One of the things that I think is really great and is a really good teaching truth or a really good tip for folks who are doing presentations is to really make sure that what you put out is what you deliver, right? So how many times have you gone to a workshop or a training and you read the description? For me, used to happen when it was more of like an advanced training, and people were like, "Oh, this is an advanced training, and we're gonna do this, this, and this, and this." And then you get to the training, and it's like a very introductory level, and it feels really frustrating because you're like, "No, that's not what I signed up for." Like, even I've gone back and like read the description and said, "Well, this doesn't match what they said the thing was going to be about." And so, one really important thing I think of is sort of in the pre-work before you do the workshop is really thinking about that workshop description and making sure what you say you're going to deliver is what you deliver, right? And so that's how people learn to trust you and, decide if this is someone they want to regularly sign up for things. And so, obviously sometimes things might shift or change a little bit based on who's in there, but if you've advertised it in my example as like an advanced training and then you show up in very introductory level, that is going to be really frustrating for your audience. And the opposite would be true as well. If you advertise it as an intro training and you got there and it's like, uh, like a super advanced level, or you're using lots of acronyms that someone who's new to the topic that you're talking about might not be familiar. So really thinking like the success of your workshops and your trainings probably starts, or not probably, definitely starts, even before you show up to do the training. And so definitely getting clear about that description of your workshop, and then also getting clear on the learning objectives. Now, most of a lot of the professional development that I do is based in Vermont. And in Vermont, for early childhood educators, when we do a workshop, it's required that we have learning objectives and that we clearly state what the learning objectives are and what people will get out of the workshop. And so there's sort of I think it's a good rule to have. Not that's not the case everywhere, but even if it wasn't the case of being required to do that, I do think it brings a lot of clarity to what you're presenting. And so, both writing the workshop description and writing those learning objectives helps to really solidify what you're going to present in your workshop. So, for the next hour that we're going to spend together, I am going to try to keep a check in the chat box in real time. So, if as I'm talking you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Also, feel free to interrupt and unmute yourself and ask a question that's relevant to what we're talking about. I am going to move a little bit quickly, but I am also recording. So hopefully, I mean, I don't think I'm going to talk so fast, but reading the room and knowing that your pacing is good for the folks that are there is also a really good tip. So, knowing your audience is one of the first steps that I like to think about. Knowing our audience so that we really are tailoring the workshop to who's there. So, some of the workshops that I do and professional trainings that I do, are in person trainings, and I'll go to a childcare center and present a workshop, or go to a school and present a series of workshops. And so it's really important to know your audience so that you can tailor the content to what they need and what their professional experiences are. So if I'm going to a childcare center and I'm working with a group of new staff to their center, obviously I want to make sure that I'm meeting them right where they are. And so the more that you can know your audience before you get started is really, really key. So even like for this live workshop that we're doing on Zoom, there was a question, and there was only one question, really open-ended question in the registration form, but that one question helped me to create space so that people who had a specific question could ask it before we got started. And so that really, even just that one little tip helps me, or that one little strategy of asking an open-ended question. And same thing in my email that I sent for confirming that this workshop was happening. In the email, I said, let me know if you have other questions. And I also said at the end of tonight, the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time together is going to be an open Q&A time. And I already sort of planted the seed to say, bring your questions with you, because if I don't get through them when I'm talking, we can always circle back to them you know, at that time. And so I think really, to me, this is a lot about relevance, and that it's what I'm presenting is relevant to your work. And so I talk about this both in the college courses that I offer and like 2-hour workshops, as well as longer series and things that I do, is really making sure that what I'm presenting is actionable and is realistic. Like, how many times have you gone to a training and you're like, this person has not worked with young children in a long time, or this person isn't isn't doesn't understand my topic. If this is, it's not actionable, it's not real life. But one of my other really top tips for creating engaging workshops is making sure that you're using stories and personal experiences. So we want, we're living in an age of AI and robots, and you can search on Google for anything. But when you go to a in-person workshop, or even a Zoom workshop like this that's live in real time, we want, or actually even a recorded workshop, like a pre-recorded on demand kind of workshop, even in that kind, sharing stories and anecdotes really help, I think, build that connection between you and the people who are listening to you. They want to hear your stories. And I know, especially for my undergraduate students, they love my failure stories, right? Like when something is completely flopped and it was just a disaster, I think that they like that because it helps them feel comfortable to know, oh, April has flopped at this before, and I think sometimes when we share those personal stories, like it really does help build the connection, and I feel like it helps build trust between you and the people that you're talking to. Um, I think your stories also build, you can build in some humor and some build in some real life because if you're presenting on a particular topic, we know that you could go and just read an article or go read a blog or something on the website on a website or go search Google for something. So you want to think about like delivering something that's a little bit more builds a little bit more connection. Having an interactive element, I think, is really important too. So, I've been doing doing presentations, early childhood presentations for the last 14 years. But actually, even earlier in my career, my very first part of my career, right after high school, is I became a massage therapist and then a yoga teacher, and I ran a holistic health center. And even way back then, like when I was 19, I started leading workshops related to the content of what we did at the Holistic Health Center. So, about making tea and stress reduction and things like that. And I remember I was doing a series of these holistic health workshops at our local. It was like a vocational high school, but at night they had community kinds of workshops. And I offered this series of workshops. And this man came in and he saw me and he was like, oh my gosh, what are you, 18 years old? And I was like, no, I'm 19, But so I really feel like through my whole career, public speaking has been a part of it. And I just am in that role of a teacher, kind of all of the time. And so I think, using those stories is really important. And no matter what format you're using, and one of the questions that someone had pre-submitted was like, actually, Shanda, it was your question. It was, what format do people want most? And that is really hard to know. Some people are like, I only attend in-person trainings, that we meet in person and they want that human interaction. And I love those kinds of workshops, but I also know that many people want an online workshop and they want it online because it meets their busy lives, but they still want in this kind of format where it's in real time so that they can still, we can do interactive things. Like tonight, we're not going to do a breakout room just because it's hard to do for me to do a breakout room in an hour-long session, but thinking about how do we keep it interactive? And so what do people like? I don't know. Let's poll the people who are here tonight. What kind of workshop? And you can say more than one, but let's break it into three. And so in the chat, tell us, do you prefer in person? Uh, let's call it, let's say in person, Zoom, meaning, in real time on Zoom, or pre recorded. And if you like all three of those, you could put all three, but put in the chat if you're here live with us, and we'll just kind of see. We'll do a quick poll of the folks that we have tonight, and we'll see. Yeah, all three. Yeah, right. Okay. So one of the things about when you record a Zoom session, the folks who are watching the recording don't have access to the chat. And so, nothing's worse than like watching a recording and someone's like talking, referring to the chat a lot, and you're like, I have no idea what's happening over in the chat. So, just to summarize, many people say all three, that they like all three styles of those kinds of trainings. Some are certainly preferring in person or in person first, and then I like Jess's idea. In person, when I go off site for a whole day and I immerse myself in that training. I agree with that. Like one of the things that I find regionally here is a lot of our in-person trainings are in the evening, which is really makes for a very long day, right? So if you are an early educator and you start your day at 7:30 and you don't finish till 5 and then you go to a training from 6 to 8, like holy moly, that's a really long day. Or the option that Jess mentions in the chat is like going somewhere for a whole day and being able to immerse yourself in it. I agree. I really like that. Um, Others say they prefer online, so it's pretty even mix. I think for me, one of the things that I really love about online trainings is that I can attend trainings from people that I would never be able to travel to and to be able to see, and so I think there's that advantage in having access to people that you wouldn't normally get to be able to attend. And as a presenter, what I love about online is I'm able to reach people from really all around the world. And so, yeah, there's pros and cons to each type, but I do think a key aspect to making it engaging is really thinking about how do you make it interactive with people. So breakout rooms for virtual, which in person would be like small group activities, going, no matter the format, like whether it's Zoom or in person, if you just go there and the person is exclusively talking at you and never have any opportunity for engagement, that feels really strange to me. Like that's a sort of like talk at you rather than like doing something. So I really, for my own self, the types of workshops that I prefer, especially when it's in person, it's like hands on. We've got the loose parts, we're digging our hands in the soil, we're doing things like whatever we're talking about. We're not just thinking about it with our brains, but we're doing it with our hands as well. And then, of course, having it, right tonight, I'm just on camera looking at you and speaking at you, but having visuals, and that might be like it might be a slide deck. Sometimes it might be in person, like having some visual things that we're engaged with, bringing materials with you, but incorporating images and making that visual storytelling, I think is really important as well. So those are some of the key parts that I think of when I think about creating engaging workshops. Um, but one of the topics that I think is key for people deciding whether to do this. Now, some of you, I didn't quite take count how many, but at least 25 or 30% of you are already doing workshops. But oftentimes what I find that um, stops people is they have a little voice in their head, and I like to call them the little gremlin, like a little something that's happening inside of their head. And it's a limiting belief usually, and that little gremlin, gosh, it can like really stop us in our tracks. So those of you who are here live, think for a minute, what's something that's holding you back? Like your own thought process. Is there a limiting belief? And if you feel comfortable enough to share it in the chat, would you drop it in there? And I'm going to talk about the first one because that I think of that I've coached lots of people through is I don't know enough. So the I don't know enough gremlin is really funny because this one woman I was working with, she had been a family childcare provider for more than 20 years. It was almost like approaching 30 years. And she had, for all of that time, had worked with like hundreds of children. She was a network leader. She supported people every time someone thought, do I want to open a home childcare program? They went to this lady's house and worked with her. Like she had so much knowledge. It was just, it was so obvious to everyone else, but she felt like she didn't know enough. And so my tip on how to squash that gremlin of the I don't know it enough gremlin is that you have expertise based on your lived experience. And if you can learn to trust in your knowledge and your passion, even if that knowledge and passion isn't like an advanced degree, and I think sometimes that thought of like, well, let me prepare for 10 more months before I do my first workshop, or let me read, 20 more books about this topic, even though you really know the topic super well. And, like learning how to squash these gremlins, I think is important. So one person shared lack of tech knowledge. Yeah, tech can be really intimidating. And so if you are wanting to present online, it can feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know enough. I haven't really used the technology. The tech gremlin, I think, is a really real one. That is my one of my gremlins too. Even though I've been doing this a long time, I really lean into my learning management system called Kajabi, and there's so much in there for me to learn. And I actually have like a little mascot. Some of you've heard me talk about this before, but this is my little tech mascot. And so when I'm feeling really frustrated, I like pull on her hair. No, I'm not mean spirited. But I get these like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do that. And so I keep this little thing at my desk, and this helps me to remember like everything is figure outable, right? Like, and the only way I'm going to figure it out is if I do it. And so if you're just getting started and you're like, gosh, I really don't know the technology, one, you probably know a teenager or have a friend who has a teenager that can probably help you with whatever tech you need help with. And you can also let your folks know, like start with a really small group of friends or coworkers or something and say, look, I'm clunky at doing Zoom and I'm not sure how well it's going to go. And if you're willing to be patient with me, I would love, to try it. I think that's how we squash the tech gremlin. Um, Another gremlin is uh, of if you're currently not in the classroom or it's like I'm out of the field and you're worried that people won't take you seriously. This one I think is an important one. And this can be that feeling of like you're not authentic or you don't have enough uh, if you're not doing it currently. And this is one that, I am still part-time in the classroom and I really like still being in the classroom. And even though it's part-time and it's like I can only grow my business so much because I am still in the classroom part-time. But I like having like fresh stories to bring. But I think that gremlin, if you're not currently working with children and you're presenting workshops based on them, or it's like you have a body of knowledge and you have a body of experiences. And so I think like there are probably some of the worst workshops that I've ever been to is because people haven't been in the field for a long time, or maybe they were only I was at a this was a long time ago, but I was at a 3-day conference, and about halfway into the first day, I realized that the person only had 2 years of teaching experience and like 10 plus years of training experiences. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it just didn't feel authentic. Like, they didn't have enough experience. But for the person who wrote that, I know for sure that you have lots of experience working with children. And even if you weren't currently in the field, thinking about opportunities, like even if it were only monthly or twice a month, to go and visit a program and support them and then like help have some fresh stories, through that way. And so I think that's a gremlin that we could you know, that we could squash pretty easy. Um yes, here's a really big gremlin, the imposter syndrome gremlin. And I think many people, it's important to know that even speakers who make huge, like keynote speakers who make huge speaking fees, continue to struggle with imposter syndrome. And so this is one where, kind of um, knowing that other people have imposter syndrome, I think helps make it a little bit easier. And I feel like the way to squash it, squash imposter syndrome, really, to me, I think is coming up with a motto or an affirmation or something, and definitely doing some reading about imposter syndrome, both from the woman who wrote the book Presence. Uh, Amy Cuddy is a really good one. So Amy Cuddy has some strategies. Her book is called Presence. It's a little bit old now. It's probably more than 10 years old, but I think the content in there is really great. She does a lot. It's a very more technical, a little bit more technical and slightly drier reading, but in it she talks about, or you can check out her TED Talk, actually would probably be better than reading her book, Amy Cuddy TED Talk. You could Google that and find, and she talks about power poses. And so, you know, the stance that Superman gets before he takes off and he like puffs his chest out and he puts his hands on his hips, you know, and he, or standing tall like the mountain. So she talks about doing power poses. And so sometimes when imposter syndrome, like just before you go on, now obviously it'd be real weird if you were standing at the front of the room, right, doing these power poses, but going into the bathroom and doing some power poses really can lift your energy and really help you shift your mindset. And there's definitely some research behind it. And anecdotally, I can tell you it's worked really well for me. Um, okay, those were the main gremlins tonight. Usually, I also hear about perfection, right? I need to make this perfect first. Someone told me I've been working on this workshop for 2 years, and I think I'm just about ready to do it. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm so glad to hear you're feeling ready to do it. You know, what kind of workshop is it? And it's like this, you know, it's like an hour-long workshop that they've spent 2 years like perfecting. And that gremlin of I need to make it perfect, like the perfection gremlin, to me, the way to squash that one is to have like progress over perfection, I think is a really good saying for me. Like focusing on delivering value, connecting to your audience, and knowing that even if you made mistakes, it's okay, that you're going to be relatable. They're going to know that you're a human, and that you're coming with this, you know, this energy and enthusiasm for the topic. And so please don't feel like you have to make it perfect. And so if the perfection gremlin is after you, perfection gremlin and imposter syndrome are probably, those are related gremlins, but I think it's really important. And then one of the other top ones is, what if nobody shows up? What if you did all of this and nobody shows up? And you know, if you're doing a workshop virtual and there's no fee, there's no investment that the people have made, it's quite often that you will have a lot of folks not show up. And it's important to know that it's not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on people are really busy, right? And so even if you do a workshop and your attendance number is small, just knowing that your impact, even if just one person shows up, the impact of your presentation could have, you know, a ripple effect into their, you know, into their life or into their classroom or school or beyond. So even one attendee or five attendees, it's worth your time. And if you're feeling like, boy, that's a lot of preparation, April, for only one person to show up, you can always record the session and then share that as a resource with other people. And every single time you present, you get better at what you do, right? So even if a lot of people don't come, um, you're like, okay, I did it. I can do it again. You know, that wasn't that bad. I lived to tell. I survived. Um, Early on in
April,
my
can I
career,
say
like,
something really
yeah,
fast? I'm so sorry
absolutely.
to interrupt you.
No, for
Um,
sure.
right on that same line, I had a workshop that I had prepared so much information for, and it was last spring. And I do a gardening with young children workshop, and I do it through Idaho Stars. So it's Idaho Stars pays me directly, and they sign up through our online thing. And they were supposed to provide me with an interpreter, and they couldn't find an interpreter, but they didn't let me know until we got on. And so I had these two ladies, and the one got really frustrated and she ended up getting off. But the other gal, she had her daughter come and help interpret. And then the other ladies never showed up. So I had one person and she didn't speak any English at all. And I looked it up and it was, I don't even have any idea what the language was. It was such a barrier. But her daughter knew some English, and we muddled through this workshop, and it was so incredible, and I felt so humbled and honored that I was helping early childcare in Idaho. And there's a big group of these migrants that have come to the Boise area, and they are starting to provide childcare for this group of people so that they can work. And
Mm,
so that's what she was doing. And I was like, it was so horrible. And I felt so defeated, but she got some of the information. And so that was really cool. So anyway, a lot of
very cool.
times it's still, even if you infect one person, it's
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah.
So
I love that story. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and one thing to know too is all of your print resources, like if you know Shanda had a handout that obviously she created in English and she knew she was going to have participants in other languages. There are some really great translation tools, even just Google Translate is a good one where you can take your document and put it in there and translate it into the other languages. Now, will it be perfect? No, but will it be a good resource for folks? Definitely. So I think thinking about accessibility and how we can make our resources available, like there is a lot more tools out there than we had even 2 or 3 years ago. So shifting gears and just really thinking about how building that confidence as a presenter, it really only happens through doing it, right? So messy action is better than inaction. So like getting started is really important. I do think that, like if you're going to speak in front of a group of people, practicing before you go, practicing out loud, and especially if it's a workshop where you have a certain set amount of time, timing yourself so that you know that you've got plenty of content, and just to ease your worries and your own anxieties, and having way more probably than what you need is important, but also knowing how to pace it so that you have enough content, but that you don't feel rushed. So like even tonight I'm like, gosh, this is a huge topic. I kind of feel like I could come with a fire hose and just be like and like overwhelm me with a bunch of information, but really thinking about getting actionable kinds of things and staying focused on their topic. Also starting with a strong introduction, like clearly saying like what's the purpose of tonight and what's the benefit that people are going to get. And if you're able to solve their problems, like if you're like, let depending on what your topic is, but what problem, or what challenge is it going to save, or is it going to help solve? So if you're doing a gardening workshop, it's like you would want in your description leading up to it saying like, is this an entry level gardening workshop, or is this a workshop for folks who really want to do production garden and like grow enough that they can do, that they can harvest it and do some other kinds of things, like helping them solve a problem. But oftentimes I find that in many of my workshops, like I'll have folks that come who I'm like, you already know this stuff. I'm not sure if you need to be here tonight. And they're like, no, I want to be here because I want to connect with other people doing this work, especially workshops that I do around farm to school and kind of sustainability things. Like that's a topic that people just um, some people who already know that topic well, they don't have a lot of other teachers in their lives who are doing those kinds of nature-based approaches, like through food education or through sustainability. And so sometimes people keep coming to workshops of mine, and I'm like, you could be presenting this. I'm not sure why you're here tonight. And they're like, no, no, I want to be here. So the problem that you might be solving isn't exactly just the content, but maybe the problem you're solving is they want to feel the connection to other people kind of doing that work, but making sure that I one of the things that rings really true for me, and it's something that um is I like my workshops to be really positive and uplifting. So it's like, yes, you know what? There's a ton of insane things happening in the world right now. And I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to focus on what we're here to talk about tonight. And so sometimes I've walked into particularly like regional settings where it's like a regional group of early educators have come together, and it's like there, I remember one time it had to do with lead paint testing, and it was mostly home providers, and it was like a really concerning thing, like some sort of regulation or policy or something came out about it, and I had no context because I didn't it wasn't affecting me. And it's like you hired me to come do math in the outdoor classroom, and yet everybody wants to talk about lead. And it's like, so I was like, hey, I'm I'm reading the room and I'm sensing there's a lot of conversation around this topic. Let's take 3 minutes real quick to like talk about that and do what we can do in 3 minutes. And then we're going to like hit a pause button and put that to the side and then jump into the topic that we're here tonight about. And so being able to, I think, read the room and make sure that you're checking in and honoring the concerns that people have, and to also hold the container that you came for something specific, and we want to make sure that we're focused on that. But one of the ways that you really, I think, can help this whole process is connecting to the audience through the opportunity for them to ask questions. So nothing's worse than going to like a 2 hour lecture and then they'll say, oh, we'll have questions at the end. um, and then they never get to it, right? And so even like tonight, I said, we're going to leave time for questions, but you're also welcome to interrupt me. I think that that's a really great strategy. Um, okay, one more main area that I want to talk about before I open it up for questions, and that is this idea of a niche. And so the word niche is kind of like really thinking about like who are you talking to? Like who are the people that you're presenting to? And what are you talking to them about? So thinking about the who and the audience that you're working on. Like what who are the people that you're speaking to, right? So if I was going to do a an art workshop, and I just advertised it as like it's an art workshop, and it was very vague and it wasn't clear for who it was, who knows who might show up. But if my audience, like the people who are on my email list, are early educators, the people that come to my workshops are early educators, like I want it to be really clear, like the who that I'm serving are early educators. And the more specific that you can be, the better. And infant and toddler teachers are really left out of a lot of content in early ed workshops. Like I admit to say, like, I really have the lens of a preschool teacher. And so a lot of the content that I do is really, really thinking into the preschool age. And so I like to know who my audience is and then think about how I deliver content for them. So if I have a lot of folks that show up who are after school folks who are working with children in K through 3, or working with kids who are ages 5 through 12, like the content of that art workshop is going to look really different than if the majority of the workshop is infant and toddler teachers, right? And so if I don't know who my audience is, I can't really deliver great content. So the way that we can manage that before the workshop is advertise for a specific, or make the workshop description specific for an age. So let's say that you feel really comfortable teaching an art workshop for ages 0 to teenagers. Well, is it better to offer a workshop the same night for all of that? Or would it be better to do an art workshop that's for, infant through preschool, 0 to 5, and then 5 to 8, and 9 to 12, or do you want, maybe you don't want to do three different workshops. Maybe you do want to just do one, and then, but have a plan. Like, how are you going to tailor what you're doing? So getting clear about your audience and who you serve, I think, is really important. And so sometimes we hear, sometimes there's this thing about like an audience statement, meaning like finding that clarity in who you're talking at, or who you're working with, and also what kind of workshops you're going to do. So if you think about what topic you want to speak on, like who you want to serve and what topics you want to talk about, those two things really help bring a lot of clarity into what you put out. So an example of an audience, you know, what do we call that? Like an audience statement would be something like, I create workshops that empower early educators to integrate nature-based learning experience that promote engagement and creativity. Like that's really the heart of the work that I'm doing now. Over the last 14 years, I've presented on a lot of different things, but when it's like, when I really think about who, if I'm niching down to who I'm serving, it's really early educators. It's really focused on nature based. And, from nature based, it can go different directions. Like I love science work, science related content. I love food education content. I love farm to school gardening kinds of things. And those seasonal approaches. So it's not that I've totally limited myself to just one thing, versus like a friend of mine. She is a friend of mine named Kim. She has this beautiful farm and she leads immersive plant walks. So her statement might be something like, I lead immersive plant walks for nature enthusiasts and wellness seekers, right? So the people she's talking to aren't just educators. I mean, like they might be, but they're nature enthusiasts and wellness seekers, people who are really working on their wellness. So I lead immersive plant walks for nature enthusiasts and wellness seekers, teaching them how to identify, ethically harvest, and use wild medicinal plants to deepen their connection to the natural world. Um, that kind of description is like, oh, our focus isn't on like how we're going to do art stuff, or how we're going to, make a mud kitchen. We're actually going to go out there and we're going to meet some of these medicinal plants and we're going to learn the skills of wild harvesting. Like that's a very different workshop than, just like learning how, not just, but learning how to put a mud kitchen on. Another example, a woman that I support, she in her business, she's a nurse, but she creates uh, CBD products. And so workshops that she offers might say something like, I offer hands on workshops for wellness and herbal remedy seekers, guiding them to explore the benefits of Vermont grown CBD and other botanical remedies with a focus on crafting natural solutions to support their well being. So like as we think about what kinds of things that we are presenting, then we think like as we make that description and we put it out there, the right people are coming into our workshops. So those are just some examples. And then I'm looking at the time. The last 2 minutes before I open up for questions is one of the questions that was pre-submitted was asking about how do you um, the question was like about collecting participant emails or like how to stay in touch. And so one of the tips, if this is something, if being a speaker and doing workshops is something that you're wanting to do kind of as a side business, or maybe it's like a retire, maybe as you move out of the classroom you want to do this sort of as a retirement business. It is really important that you have a list. And so growing your email list, we might be thinking like, what? I just want to do workshops. I don't want to have an email list. I don't want to have to do like marketing and messaging and all that stuff. But really, like, in order to be able to tell people what you're doing, it's important. And so, yes, you can use social media to let people know, or you could let your local childcare network know or your local school. But if you're really thinking about how to build build an audience or let people know what you're offering, collecting their emails is a really important part. Now, there's some logistics behind it. Like you can't just get emails from people and just randomly start spamming them. But with their permission, you could say, oh, thanks for coming to my gardening workshop here at the library. Hey, if you want to stay in touch, put your name and email down on this um, piece of paper, on this clipboard. And that's how I did it for a lot of years. Now, the problem with the clipboard thing is at some point you have to take the clipboard and type in their email address and type in their name, and you have to kind of add it into a spreadsheet or something. And then that takes time. And people's handwriting, like if you don't, if you can't figure out what their handwriting is, then the email may not work. So using something like a Google form, where people add their email. So, like when you sign, the folks who signed up for this workshop, you filled out a Google form, and one of the questions said, can I add you to my email list? And you said yes. So you have given me permission. And the majority of you are already on my email list because most of you found out from reading an email earlier. But if you found out because you saw it posted on my Nature Inspired Teacher Facebook page or saw it posted somewhere else on Facebook, and you signed up for this workshop, you hopefully said yes to being on my email list so that we can continue to be in touch. And so, what I would suggest is as you start to do workshops, even if that first workshop has 5 people show up, ask them, hey, do you want to get more information and be on my email list? Now, you don't have to tell them the only person on their email list is your mom or your sister or your best friend. Like you might have no email list to begin with, but starting to build an email list is really important. So that way, when you do your next workshop, you can say, hey, if you enjoyed that spring workshop that we did about plants, good news. I finally feel confident to do another one this fall, and if you're interested, this is how you can sign up. So those are some talking points about how to get started, but I want to open it up. I'm going to be quiet, and I want to hear from you all your questions. And your questions, you could put them in the chat, or you could unmute and ask your questions, and we'll dive into them.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay. Yes.
So I typically do my workshops through Idaho Stars.
Mhm.
So they sign up through the Idaho Stars website, and then I can communicate with them, emailing them and stuff to remind them. However, a lot of people are really, a lot of providers are very, they I have a really hard time getting people to attend without getting credit or the
Yeah.
hours or whatever for their training. But what I'm wondering is if there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Like I would love to have you guys attend my workshop for free the next time I offer it. I could send you my handouts, you could copy it, use my information, then you now have a gardening workshop. So like if somebody else has a workshop, they could invite me. I
Mm,
could jump on, get ideas from them. So I am super interested in networking with others. If you guys are interested, somehow we could share our emails for that. So
absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, if you're interested in connecting with Shanda, is it Shanda or Shanda? Because I say it both ways and I whoops.
it's Shanda.
Shanda,
Yeah.
about that. Feel free to, in the chat, what you could do is you could just write the word Shanda, which you can see how it's spelled there. And then I can compile your emails because I have them, those of you who are here live. But one of the things that I think are collaborations is really powerful. So if you're like, gosh, I'm in this like little rural area and how am I going to reach people? So collaborations can be really powerful. So finding other people to do workshops with or sharing information, I think can be really important. When we put together like a handout and a slide deck and we've prepared a training, this is our intellectual property. So you hear like the IP, like your intellectual property is something that you've invested a lot of time in. And in some fields, like, if someone were to borrow your hand, I mean, it would be like scandalous, right? But what I find is that many early educators are like, I'm happy to share it because if my purpose is to get kids outside and someone else wants to present something, I'm totally happy with it. So one of my suggestions, Shanda, would be that on whatever you share with other people, that you do put acknowledgement of who you are and like how people could reach you because you have invested a lot of time into it. I have folks that reach out to me and they're like, April, I love that thing that you sent out in the email. And sometimes I have people who are like, I think you sent this out like 2 years ago, but I keep using it. And I'm wondering if I can use it in a workshop. And honestly, almost every time that someone has asked me about using a resource that I've created, I give them a thumbs up because I'm like, yeah, and if you can just attribute, that, who I am and encourage people to, come over to my website, Nature Inspired Teacher, that would be awesome, and I have college professors that reach out and they're like, I love your such and such resource. Can I use it? So yeah, I love that. Yeah, so if you want to share that with Shanda, you can definitely put it in the chat. Okay, cool. Look at that. You've got lots of takers. I'll do a group email for those people who put that in the chat. And if you're watching the recording and you're like, oh man, Shanda is an active member in our Nature Inspired Teacher Facebook group. So maybe Shanda, in that group, you could also start a thread and offer to share resources or connect with people or something. And then people could reach you that way. Let's see. Um, yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for coming. Um, who else has a question? Susan, it's great to see you, by the way. Oh, good. You
Thanks.
unmuted. Look at
I
that.
did.
I was looking
Well,
at you and you unmuted. That was powerful.
well, I actually put it in the
Oh, did I
chat,
miss
but
it? Okay.
it's good. No, it's good. It's before all the shandas,
Oh,
but
yeah, I got you.
um so I'm just curious, like when you start putting a presentation, I'm just asking for just, curiosity. Do
Yeah.
you do an outline or do you just start putting it together and just go to get like I have never actually done an outline and
Oh,
now I'm in
okay.
a situation where I might have to start doing outlines. And so I was
Yeah.
just curious, do you do an outline and present and
Mhm.
create it or do you just create it and then like, okay, here's my new outline?
I'm going to show you my process. It's kind of messy. It's like the process before the outline is really a web. Oh, shit. Too far away. So I have these handy dandy trifold boards that we use, for the like science fair projects. And so a lot of times what I do is I start with a post-it note party. And my post-it note party, basically this board here is specific to winter. But during my post-it note party, sometimes I do this alone, just my own self, and like thinking of all of the ideas or questions that people might have about a topic. Or sometimes I do it with, this one was done with a child care center. They had about, maybe 40 staff member there, and it was an in-person one, and everybody had a lot of questions and I had 6 hours. So I was like, okay, let's like write down our ideas. And so we kind of made this mind map or did like a little post-it note party of like all the different topics. And then from this, you can start to cluster them together. Like, oh, all of these are about gear, how to get gear, how to store gear, how to fix gear, how to get parents to comply with gear, or these are like community things, like whatever. And so you kind of cluster them together. And then from there, so like I like I'm a visual person, so I'll like spend a lot of time sort of on this and kind of get all the ideas out. Sometimes in the Nature Inspired Teacher Facebook group, I'll do a hive mind, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to be doing like a week or more ago, I put I'm going to be writing an integrated unit on ants. What are books, what topics that you like? And so that's kind of the like, because I only have my own thoughts, but when I do this with someone else, it can be really powerful. But so taking this, so whether you call, I like to call it a post-it note party because that sounds fun. But if you do like a webbing kind of thing, and then from here, you kind of group the ideas. And if you're doing this in collaboration with others, then you can kind of hear like, um, you start to hear a lot of the same questions, and then that helps you to know like how much time to spend on different things. But I do sort of have an outline. It's probably not as formal. Like we're about the same age probably, and we learned how to actually write like legit outlines with the spacing and all of that. Um, and I think it kind of works, but I also kind of keep it fluid to know because you might design that workshop for a particular childcare center that has a specific kind of, you know, burning issue, and that might not be the same burning issue the next time you do it. So yes, sort of use an outline, but I think this process is a little bit more generative and feels a little more creative. And then also, uh, you know, I think asking other people about what questions they have about the topic can be important. And then sometimes as you're doing this, you're like, oh, this would be good stuff for me to talk about. And this would be good things just to make a print resource because some of these things you could easily just type something up. So, and that's like that thing of, I tend to always for trainings like at, send something extra, like a little follow up, like, and then it's like you didn't get to say everything you wanted because you had 5 hours of content and you had 1 hour to present, but you can send them resources. And then, if this is something that you're growing as a business, thinking about those resources as they really become, we call them like digital assets. So you might put that up if you have a website and you want to put it up as a blog. Then it becomes what's considered long form content, meaning like when you write a blog once, it stays up there and you can refer to it. So then if you're in a Facebook group and someone's asking a question about, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy with winter gear. What am I going to do? And you can pop a little, pop the link to your blog in there. Now, obviously, you don't want to like take over the Facebook page or something and like be spammy. But if it's a resource that you have, whether it's like long form content would be like a blog post, or it could be a YouTube video, or um, it could be a TikTok. I'm not a TikTok person myself, but you could put a link to another resource that you created. So that's a long winded answer, but it's good to see you. Right. Other questions? Um, let's see. Do, do. Right. One of the questions that was pre-submitted was in person, online, in real time, or recorded. We did that one. There's definitely pros and cons to each of those. Another question was about, oh yeah, Shanna, that was your question, was increasing attendees. I tend to think of like your best leverage for getting more people to show up is really tapping into your existing network. So word of mouth is really powerful. Getting people who are the like, yeah, I definitely want to come to that. And you're like, okay, great. Can you bring two friends? And then it's like maybe that person will show up with some other people. Um, uh, having testimonials. So like people who've taken your gardening workshop in the past and were like, oh my gosh, I loved this workshop because it gave me X, Y, and Z, and it's like
Yeah.
these are awesome. And so for that reason, we'll uh yeah, like sharing other people's what they thought of it is another great way.
Yeah. Well, I'm 3 hours from anything, and I live in a very small town. So if I want to do an in-person one, I have to drive, 3 hours. So what I've done is I do those often. I travel all over Idaho, but what I've done is like reach out to a center and say like, "Hey, will you guys host me? And I'll offer you 2 free slots for your staff." Or give them a discount or whatever, and then we can invite other providers, to come. And it's funny, like some communities, they're so competitive. They don't want anybody else in their center. But I've done them at hotels. I've done them at, different places. I love doing in person because my all day workshop is all hands on stuff
Yes.
and recipes and, whatever. I was trained under the ooey gooey lady, Lisa Murphy. And so, I like those hands on ones, but during COVID, we were so, that was such a good thing that we got to do these online things. And I just feel like Idaho was such rock bottom for quality. Now they're trying to get us up in quality. So they're offering all this, like, all their workshops are like so academic and they're, or like, oh, let's learn about autism or let's, learn about behaviors in the classroom. And it's like, you wouldn't have behaviors in the classroom if you got them outside, and it's just, Idaho's just they're going about it really wrong. And so, and a lot of times when I'm presenting online, it's just a flat line. Like they can't grasp the concept of it because their, directors are telling them they need to do alphabet and numbers and
Yeah.
they don't have time to do whatever. So it's a struggle, but
Yeah. For sure. And I think sometimes like it's that niche though, like finding the right people. So trying to attract people who what happens is like for a free workshop, a lot of times people will sign up because it's 2 hours and that's what they need. And so you're not attracting like your ideal folks, versus like doing like an all day in person workshop where it's like you really are attracting people who are interested in your thing. So that might be, if you're traveling to a particular town, like having things posted in the co-op or the health food store or the, I don't know, the yoga studio or the place where people who are interested in the topic of natural foods or things, like you would attract different maybe different people that would come to it. But yeah, it can feel disheartening, especially when we've put a lot of hours into something, especially if you've added like the whole travel time to it, like that can feel really challenging. But I definitely hear what you're saying. Um, we are at the 8 o'clock mark, so I'm going to begin to wrap this up. I just want to say thanks for those of you who came and attended live. I am going to send a resource out. It's a presenter's checklist, and it's like, I guess it's probably more so for in-person presentations, but it's what I use to like prep myself, and I think takes a little bit of the worry away of having like, how am I organized and what am I bringing with me when I'm doing those workshops. But I highly encourage you, to jump in, to try the thing, even if your first presentation is just with a really small group of friends, or colleagues or people within your, within your inner circle. I think it's one of those things, and I share the story of a woman named Kim who got me started. She basically roped me into it, and I all but couldn't say no. And I was like, I'm going to do this once, it's going to flop, and I'm never going to do it again. And here I am 14 years later, and I'm doing it as, a big part of my career. So I'm here to encourage you. Our Facebook group, Nature Inspired Teacher, is a really great spot to gather, ask some questions about what content you want to, what say, I want to present on such and such topic, and what are the questions you have, or what's hard about this, and use that group in that way to gather some information. But just to know, if those gremlins pop up, you could just grab them by the horns and say, not today. And taking that messy action, I think, is important. But have a great night, and be well. Thank you.